Now, tennis world number one Novak Djokovic has been released from immigration detention in Australia. This after a court quashed his visa cancellation by that country's government. But the decision doesn't necessarily mean the end of the issue. Australia's immigration minister could still intervene. This comes after he was detained, that is Djokovic, and refused a visa after entering the country with a COVID-19 vaccine medical exemption. So where does this leave Djokovic and the reputation of the Australian Open? Bruce Davidson is an independent tennis analyst and has worked and managed top international tennis players around the world and joins us now for a discussion on this issue. Bruce, thank you for your time. Just your overall take of this. The team, I don't know much about tennis, Bruce. The team was telling me that this is 15 for Djokovic and love for the Australian government. Do you agree?
Absolutely. This is a big blow for the Australian government, who we know are just so strict with all their rules and regulations. We've seen this over the years, how they are absolutely paranoid. I've travelled to Australian Open a number of times, been with the Spark Rogiers when they've gone to play World Cup in Sydney, and it's just not easy. And Djokovic really had done nothing wrong other than told everybody, I'm not going to be vaccinated. That's his stance. He was offered a medical exemption and he came into the country. But obviously there was complications of communication between the federal government and then, of course, Tennis Australia, their national tennis body, as well as the state of Victoria, because the state of Victoria and Tennis Australia had actually given him the medical exemption. But it was the border posts that are controlled by the national federal government that refused to let him into the country, revoked his visa and put him into detention, which was very, very difficult for Djokovic, being the ultimate professional, world number one, defending champion, to go into a quarantine-type, deportation-type hotel that is similar to a two-star South African hotel with no training facilities, and he's been there since Wednesday.
So if I understand you correctly, Bruce, there was a sort of two separate processes. One should separate Djokovic's stance on vaccination as one, set of issues, his influence or otherwise, in as far as that issue is concerned, but separate that from the legal, crossing your T's and dotting your I's, which in your view he had done, and therefore there was no basis for him to be detained in the way that it happened.
Absolutely. When the Prime Minister of Australia announced 9 months ago that no tennis player would be allowed into into Australia unless they were vaccinated, he made that very clear. So that was clear. But he did say unless they had a medical exemption. And this is where Djokovic had applied for a medical exemption to the body that he was going to be playing for, and that was the Australian Open, which is controlled by Tennis Australia. They had two independent medical panels looking at this, one from the Victorian state, one from Tennis Australia, and both gave him the exemption. So he was able to get onto the plane in Dubai and travel through to Melbourne. But when he arrived, the border posts refused to let him in. He did tell them that he had had COVID in the last year or two, and twice actually. He was very transparent about them, but they revoked his visa. They didn't give him enough time to actually work things out and get in touch with the right people. He arrived at 11:30 in the evening on Wednesday, so it didn't give him much chance to get hold of people, and they put him straight into this hotel, which has been a very difficult one for Djokovic, because he has obviously not been able to train, he's not been able to do all the things that he would normally do, and it has obviously put his preparation back. But he's won this victory. He's staying in the country. He's been moved to a hotel. We've seen him now working out on the balconies of this other hotel where he can actually train and start preparing. But it is going to be a very interesting stance, because we're waiting for the minister to decide whether he's going to use his powers to cancel the visa, which he can, or let it go through. And it's going to be interesting to see how he's welcomed by the Australian public, who are so against people that do not want to be vaccinated. They have the highest percentage of vaccinations in the world, and they are absolutely adamant that people should be vaccinated. It's going to be interesting how this plays out.
So my producer, Peter van Onselen, who's an avid tennis follower, tells me that this whole saga around immigration and medical exemption and the presence of Rafa Nadal and the chase for 21 Grand Slam titles sets this up and seasons it in a way. It sort of seasons it in such a way that we are in for some delectable action as and when Novak Djokovic is able to play, assuming, of course, that the Minister of Immigration doesn't invoke those powers. What do you think of that? How high does this raise the stakes?
Well, I think that the sporting world in general has been very, very, very interested in this case, because it's, number one, COVID related. Number two, it's to do with the vaccination, which is a talking point around the world. And it's to do with Novak Djokovic, who's a defending champion. He's had more success at the Australian Open than any other Grand Slam, and he basically owns the Australian Open. Now he goes into the Australian Open. There were a lot of players that were hoping that he might not have played because it would have given them a very good chance, because we know Roger Federer is not going to be there. We know that Rafa Nadal has just come out of injury, although he did win in Adelaide yesterday, his 89th title, which makes him a strong contender for the Australian Open title. But now that Djokovic is playing, it's going to be very interesting, because we could now have this dream Djokovic versus Rafa Nadal match that everybody loves. We've seen them play some epic matches before. And also those younger players that might have had a chance, like Tsitsipas, Medvedev, to win a slam in Australia that has been dominated by Djokovic for so many years, now all of a sudden realize this is going to be a lot of hard work to get Djokovic's title away from him.